The Joe Rogan Experience.
Who was a veteran as well.
Mm.
That's one thing that you have over them for sure, is that you understand from firsthand experience and sacrifice what it means to actually be in war and to be in combat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still serve in the Army National Guard now over 16 years. I've deployed twice to the Middle East, and coupled with my experience in Congress, serving over 6 years on the Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committees, working intimately on these issues related to national security and our foreign policy, meeting with leaders of different countries in the world. It is these experiences and the understanding that I've gained from them that best equip me to walk into the Oval Office on day one, ready to do the job of president and, most importantly, commander-in-chief.
What hurdles are you encountering that you didn't expect?
A lot of what's happening are things that we kind of did expect. The smear campaigns, the misinformation campaigns.
Do you think that someone's doing this on purpose, or do you think this is team mentality in action, where people are supporting a particular candidate and they look at you as being competition of that candidate? Like, what do you think?
I think it's probably a combination. I'm challenging the establishment, challenging the status quo, challenging the foreign policy establishment, and challenging the political establishment in calling things as I see them, calling it straight and speaking the truth, whether that be calling out leaders within my own party or leaders of the other political party. And, I think that strikes fear in a lot of people who are uncomfortable with it at a minimum and who are concerned because when, we the people rise up and say, hey, what's really going on here? We're calling out self-serving politicians in Washington from both political parties who are putting their own political interests or the interests of their party ahead of the interests of the people. Or they're putting the interests of, whatever greedy corporation and their lobbyist is writing the biggest checks to their campaigns ahead of the interests of the people. So the more this awareness comes out, the more people stand up and speak out and say, hey, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. Then it's threatening that very power base that they have thrived and lived off of for far too long.
We should talk about how you're funded too, just so people understand your position.
Yeah.
So
people-powered campaign. We take
100%.
no PAC contributions, no lobbyist contributions. Every single dollar that comes to my campaign for president is coming from individual people across this country, whether it's $1 or $1,000, people who are giving whatever they can and joining this movement.
There's a great joke. I think it's from Dennis Miller. I hope I'm not misquoting it, but he was talking about how politicians wear patches in their jackets like NASCAR drivers.
Seriously. That is.
like you should have to know.
Seriously.
Yeah, someone should have to know.
Have those disclaimers there.
If I put my tinfoil hat on when I talk about these interventionist foreign policy wars and regime change wars, the tinfoil hat thinks military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
People being asked or forced into making decisions that benefit these giant corporations that make weapons and profit off of war.
Yeah.
This is the worst case scenario in terms of conspiracy theories. The idea that someone wants war so that they can make money and they don't care if people die, even needlessly. This is our number one conspiracy fear, right? If you had to think about of all the things that you hope are not true about the way the world works, that would probably be number one.
Well, you can take your tinfoil hat off because the military-industrial complex is a real thing. This is something that President Eisenhower talked about.
Which is an amazing speech.
Amazing speech. His last speech as President of the United States, of all the things that he could talk about, he chose to focus on the military-industrial complex.
Should we play that right now?
It is.
I feel like we should play that.
Yes,
just because
absolutely.
It's
play
so,
that clip.
It's so crazy, and most people have never heard it before. And you hear about the term military-industrial complex, and one thing that has been done that's really interesting is the word conspiracy has become a dirty word.
Yeah.
And that dirty word, or a word that's it's easy to make something silly by calling it a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Even though there are times where people conspire to do things.
That's right.
I mean, that's why that
right.
word exists. I mean, it's not like people don't make plans to do things that are illegal.
Yeah.
Of course they do. That's why the FBI is around. But this is from the National Archives, and this was Eisenhower's speech as he was leaving office.
With a message of leave-taking and farewell.
1961.
The speech did not get very much attention. When a new
Oh,
president...
who is this guy? Jamie, you picked up the wrong version. Son of a bitch. I'm sure there's an actual version of it. Here we go. January 17th, 1961. Back when everything was black and white.
The President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations.
This is a bad one too, Jamie. You son of a bitch.
While he's looking for the right clip,
I think
what
he's
most
just going to
people
play
don't
music
know,
in the background. That's all it's going to do.
what most people don't know is that his first draft of that speech said Congressional Military Industrial Complex.
Whoa.
And somewhere between the draft and the speech that was delivered, he took out that word congressional. But he was directly connecting those dots.
Whoa.
That some may say, oh, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. But he was connecting those dots with the influence that the military-industrial complex has on leaders in Congress who are making decisions about how our money is spent and where our troops are sent off into battle.
Congressional military-industrial complex. Wow. I need extra foil.
Get you a new box.
It's crazy how they couldn't keep the camera steady back then either.
I wasn't do it either. I hear someone else's voice.
Here it goes.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.
Just skip ahead a couple seconds here.
A vital element
Here it goes.
in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Okay,
we should take nothing for granted.
You could listen to the rest of the speech if you want to online, but it's very chilling.
Yes.
Because this is the sitting president leaving office, and this is what he wants to tell people.
And a soldier.
Yes.
He's a guy who had military experience. He's a guy who saw firsthand wearing the uniform and then serving as commander-in-chief. And this was his final warning to the nation.
The military companies are like most companies. They always want to grow. Mm-hmm. Companies seek infinite growth. They constantly seek better quarters. Every year they want to make more money than they did last year. That's what they're doing. They're in the business of making money. They're not just in the business of creating things. They're creating things for a profit.
That's right.
And they're going to have a little wiggle room, and especially with politicians. It's politicians that are in their pocket, and they've spent millions of dollars helping them along the way.
Yeah.
And, they're going to help each other.
Yeah.
And this long history of helping each other.
That's right. That's, you see that very directly through contributions that are being made to politicians by different defense contractors and the corresponding votes that are then taken. But you also see this corruption that's happening before our very eyes, happening within places like the Pentagon, where you either have people in uniform or civilians who are working in contracting, for example, in the Pentagon, laying the groundwork for writing up these contracts, major multi-billion-dollar contracts with these big defense contractors, and then lay down the uniform, or you retire from service, either as a civilian or in the military, and then you turn around, leave that door and walk into another door working for the very same contractor that you just wrote the contract for.
Yeah.
This is happening. This is what we need to change when we're talking about both campaign finance reform, but also reforming this kind of corruption and this revolving door that's happening in different parts of our government. You see it happening in Wall Street too.
Yes.
The SEC regulators, people are supposed to be regulating Wall Street, are coming from Wall Street and then going back to Wall Street to work for the very same companies that they were supposedly just charged to regulate. This is a big problem that we've got to fix.
Yeah, there's a fantastic documentary on that called Inside Job. I don't know if did you see it?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You see when he's confronting these guys who are professors who then go and take these jobs and make millions of dollars with the very regulations that they help put into place.
That's right. And it's happening with foreign policy as well. When you look at who are the main people who go and testify in front of Congress, coming from think tanks, very well-known think tanks, global think tanks that specialize in foreign policy. They don't have a placard on their desk when they're testifying before Congress saying, we receive funding from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from the United Arab Emirates, from all these different countries who are spending a lot of money funding these think tanks that then come forward and push policies or push ideas to leaders in Congress that not coincidentally benefit the countries that are funding them.
What could be done to stop that other than someone like you getting into power?
Well,
and what could you do once you get in there?
I think two things. I mean, obviously, as president and commander in chief, you set the tone for the kind of leadership that we have in this country that will put service above self. And this is what I will bring as president. Bring those soldiers' values of putting service above self, putting service to the American people and your country first and foremost, ahead of everything else, ahead of the interests of a political party or a corporation or a foreign country, for that matter, and work to pass legislation in Congress that would close these revolving doors, that would require this transparency when you're talking about who is funding who and where is this money coming from. I think members of Congress should not be taking PAC contributions, should be relying solely on contributions from people in this country so that they know exactly who is funding their campaigns.
That really seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
That one seems like a no-brainer.
And
if
it's
you really
something
want what the people want.
It's something that's starting to happen organically as more and more people are calling for this kind of reform and saying, hey, look, if you want my vote, then I expect you to not accept those contributions and to run a people-powered campaign.
How many people are doing that besides you?
There's a couple who are running for president. There is a slowly growing number of people who have run for and gotten elected to Congress. But look, it's in the margins compared to where we need to be.